what is it, animal spirits and all that stuff is not true. We all as humans have that capacity. What is true is that the Eastern Band specifically has been connected to this land for over 10,000 years. And when you are connected and rooted to a land for that long, you develop a relationship through it, almost in your DNA, and learn how to respect it, learn how it will serve you if you respect it. And so that's, that is part of our worldview. It's not something that is magic. It just makes common sense when you are from a community so historically tied to the land.
That gets a little bit, another question I had was how the landscape and culture of Western North Carolina play a role in your book. Can you tell us a little bit? So a lot of people, a lot of the students probably, they know you're an author and they know you have a book. I'm not certain that everyone has had a chance to read it. Could you tell us a little bit about what the setting is and how that plays, how kind of the setting might serve even as a character?
Sure, yeah. In fact, this is a different kind of project for me, because usually I don't think of my writing as being setting driven. It's usually character driven or maybe even plot driven. But this book in particular is setting driven because it is set the summer of 1942, when the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, which is a resort. It is a upper class resort. I was just talking to my husband about not being able to afford to go stay at the Grove Park. So it's still open today. But in 1942, they held Axis diplomats and foreign nationals as prisoners of war, just that summer. And so my main character, County, is a 19-year-old Cherokee young man who leaves Cherokee to go work at the Grove Park as a member of the grounds crew. He wants to make money. He thinks maybe for college. He really, it's very much a coming of age story because he's not exactly sure what he wants to do with himself. And he's joined by a young Cherokee woman named Essie. She's also about the same age. She's pretty clear that she wants to go to college, and is there to make money for that. While he is at the Grove Park, and he kind of goes back and forth between Cherokee and the Grove Park, he is accused of being involved in the disappearance of a diplomat's daughter. And so he has to, and he's betrayed in the process. And so he has to prove his innocence. He is also trying to kind of unravel the mystery of his family back home. His father died at the tail end of World War I, and it's never really clear what happened there. And so he is sorting out, family issues. He has an enormous crush on Essie, and is working out that relationship as well. And all of a sudden is being accused of a diplomat's daughter's disappearance and possibly murder.
So if y'all want to get a glimpse of the setting, you'll have to, after this conversation, go look up the Grove Park Inn. I'm with you. I can't afford to stay there either. I can drive by it and look at its majesty, but it's never been one of those places. But it is pretty, and it kind of plays a role. Like it's a well-known landmark in North Carolina. So I also love that this is kind of just a North Carolina novel, especially being a North Carolina native myself. That's another thing that makes this really exciting. I was wondering if you have a section of your book that you might share with us, that you might read a little of, so we can get a taste of it.
Sure. I think I'll, because I know that several folks may not have read it yet. So I always like to start with the prologue, because it does set a tone for the place, and then you also don't need really any background if I start with the prologue. So I will read it. It's short. About the place, when I take you there or when you find it on your own, just know that what the old folks say is true. This land is ours because of what is buried in the ground, not what words appear on a paper. But also know this: what is buried in the ground isn't always what you think. It's just the beginning. It's the beginning of the story, the beginning of all of us who call ourselves Homo sapiens. Fitting, I guess, that what I found buried, just as I was trying to figure out how to become a man and still be human, was the very thing that threatened to take it all away. Just when I began to see what taking control of my own life might look like, I realized I was not who I thought, and neither was this place. That summer in 1942, when I met her, really met her, before I found myself in a white man's cage and entangled in the barbed wire that destroyed my father, I left the cage of my home in Cherokee, North Carolina. I left these mountains that both hold and suffocate and went to work at the pinnacle of luxury and privilege, Asheville's Grove Park Inn and Resort. I guess I had convinced myself that I could become fortunate by proximity, escape Uncle Bud's tirades and my grandmother Leishy's empty kitchen cabinets just by driving a couple of hours up the road. It sounded good to tell folks I was raising money for college, but the truth was I didn't know what I was doing. I just didn't want to do it there anymore. And if I stayed any longer, I would become rooted so deeply I might as well have been buried. My plan didn't quite work the way I thought it would. When I got to the resort, I mostly stayed outside, cut the trees, mowed the grass, and helped to dig the holes that would sink signs and posts for barbed wire fences. Music occasionally seeped from the ballroom, but was muted by thick lead pane windows before one note ever reached the perimeter of the property. That's where I first found the bone. I was on my hands and knees pitching rocks and digging holes. It was just as the inn, like its music, was becoming dulled by wartime restrictions and hushed by lead bullets. The prisoners, who were actually diplomats and foreign nationals treated more like guests, weren't really known to me yet. That little girl, God bless her soul, had barely even stepped foot on the property, and I was still as free as I would ever be. I squatted there by the fence along the boundary of the Grove Park property and grasped the bone by its middle, pointing both ends upward, studying its curvature. A bent bauble for my idle adolescent hands to fidget with in absence of a ball stick or a soldier's rifle. I can't recall playing with many toys as a child. That's probably why the bones spoke poetry to me as a young man. It was smooth and porous, its slight C curve angled in motion, calling to be grasped, used, a weapon at least in some primitive function of strength, like a subhuman scythe, though innately human, maybe even the very core of humanity. And now, as I recall the moment out loud, it was an embarrassing indulgence of make believe for a 19-year-old. It's all right to laugh, I don't blame you. Such an extraordinary object to be inside flesh. It was wholly earthen, not sterile or cellular. It was natural in a way we pray our body is not. Momentary, seasonal, destined for expiration. The bone had lost its story, petrified into a mere alkaline deposit transient and nameless. I was immediately spellbound by this calcified opportunity to embrace a remnant of life's existence in one hand, dry it, dust it, preserve it, and listen. Buried by a story, and I was the only one on this earth privileged to hear it. County, it seemed to coo my name like the beautiful girls of my daydreams, the ones who never took interest in boys like me. Just as I was yet to know of a certain beautiful girl's power, I was yet to understand the power that bone would wield over my life. I was yet to know how much more I would risk for her, for it. I am bits and pieces of the people I meet, my teacher once told me. Though more accurately, I am of people and places and creatures. And so, because of that summer and that war and that small, hollow relic, I am bits and pieces of a grand estate and a half tame primate and a dozen accents and a missing girl and a fearful girl and all the trees and mountains and asphalt in between. And you, well, I reckon you will be too soon enough. Knowing that she is now gone from this earth, all I'm left to do is wonder what remains of her here. For me, for anyone who knew or didn't know her, what remains to the memories? How long do they survive? I can still see her dancing, head thrown back, laughing. If there's one thing old age has taught me, it's that there are many kinds of love. She taught me that sometimes we feel many different kinds with one person. And now it seems possible that love is the only thing that will outlive us all, but only if we continue to tell its story.
Thank you. That's really beautiful. What was the first element of this book? Where did this book come from? Was it county? Was it the location? Was it the time period? What was the seed that started all of it?
Well, I guess it was serendipitous that a few things converged at the same time. I don't know if you're familiar with or you remember when the movie Monuments Men came out. I know it. It used to, I think it was a book first. I didn't read the book, but definitely watched the movie. And the Asheville Citizen-Times did an article about the Biltmore House housing precious artwork during World War II for safekeeping, much like is talked about in Monuments Men, but it was talking about specifically the Biltmore's role. And there was like a paragraph in that article that mentioned that the Grove Park held Axis diplomats as prisoners of war. And I had never heard that story before, and I've lived here my whole life. So I found that really interesting, and it made me recall that Indian reservations out west served as internment camps, Japanese internment camps during World War II, in a couple of cases. And it just kind of triggered that thought about where we put prisoners of war, and how interesting and complex that is, and what that says about land and citizenship. And I also was kind of coming off a first novel manuscript that was almost published, but didn't get published. And so it was like this emotional roller coaster. And I needed a new project and I needed a fresh start. So I went to the Silva Library, and there is this room that you can go in. It reminds me of, there are rooms like this in libraries and colleges, I know, because we had them, but it's just like a white room, tiny little closet kind of space, nothing in there but a desk and a chair. And I gave myself a prompt to write about the simplest object I could think of for as long as I could think of, just to get something generated. And I keep a quote handy. It's usually on my backdrop of my computer, by James Baldwin, that says, write a sentence as clean as a bone. And I'm pretty sure that is why I chose to then use a bone as a writing prompt. And so I just wrote and wrote and wrote. In fact, what I just read you from the prologue is mostly what I wrote in that writing exercise. And it got me thinking about identity and how we create labels, how we determine citizenship and belonging in communities, and how so much of it is based on like skin color and our DNA, and how ridiculous that is, that we use these elements that will eventually just disappear, and how we do not instead ask questions of the human spirit when determining belonging. And so with that kind of rolling around in my brain about the Grove Park, I thought it would be a great opportunity to kind of turn up the heat on those questions and bring, a Cherokee man into that place, someone who is from a culture that has always been here, but who whose citizenship it was still questionable, for Native Americans. um, we're one of the last groups, or the last group, to get full citizenship rights, especially in terms of like voting within states and things like that. Yet Native Americans serve at the highest rate in the U.S. military, of all groups. So I'm always interested in ironies and complexities, and having this upper class resort to talk about social issues, social class, and then also issues of citizenship and race and how that would all play out right in the middle of a war. I thought had the elements of a novel for sure.
I think that's great. So it started with the bone.
It did, yeah.
That's really great. So this is my favorite question to ask of you, and I have to confess I've been in other readings that you've done. So
I hope I answered the same way. I'll just make something up, right?
I know. So do you consider your novel to be Native American fiction or historical fiction or both or neither? Or if what do you think about those categories?
Well, it's funny because, okay, I mean, I think it's Native American fiction pretty easily because I am Native American. It's a Native American topic. It is set partly in a tribal community. So I fit very neatly in there, although we could have a long discussion as to what is Native American literature. I'm sure you do in your class. What's funny is I know now that it is historical fiction, but when I was writing it, I never thought of it as historical fiction. I thought of it as literary fiction. And I think that was because I was scared for it to be historical fiction. My husband is a former history teacher, and I was an American Studies major. But prior to that, I didn't feel like I was that grounded in history. So I don't remember dates well. I don't remember numbers well. And I get really nervous about that. So to think of it as a historical novel, I get really nervous about how accurate, it's expected to be. Which is one of the reasons why the topic worked well for me, because there's very little information about what actually happened at the Grove Park during that time, because obviously they're not letting reporters in, to cover the day-to-day life. So I had some flexibility. I didn't feel like I was tied to too many facts and figures. But, now looking at it, it's definitely a historical novel. I mean, it happened. But things like, I don't know that there were ever any Cherokee working at the Grove Park during that time. And in fact, I really doubt that there were. But and the other thing is, it's an Appalachian novel. It is really rooted in place, and place becomes central. I couldn't put it anywhere else. The story doesn't work anywhere else. So, I definitely consider it that.
Well, and I know that just in the past couple of weeks, you've been included on all kinds of lists of Native American literature, or the novel has, which has been really exciting. And I think, thinking about my class, and a couple of my students are in this group, they would say, it ticks off all the boxes, at least the way that we're defining it. But I also think sometimes it's troubling to label too much, because it still feels kind of marginalized to call it anything other than fiction, right? Or literature.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's always important to ask the author.
Yeah, absolutely.
How you would characterize it. So you talked about being influenced or being prompted by James Baldwin. Who are some of your other influences?
Yeah, absolutely. And, not just that quote, but I do love James Baldwin. Louise Erdrich, especially if we're talking Native authors, and for I think a lot about what I teach. Toni Morrison, this book in particular, the voice of this book was really influenced by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I teach Between the World and Me, and his voice, it's a letter to his son. That was really important to me when I was thinking about voice for this book. And then, I always hate to say this, but I'm just going to be honest. I love Faulkner. I really do. Like, I know that's problematic. But, if I think about what I was reading growing up, and what clicked and was a voice that I was like, oh, where'd that come from? That's different. And, he does. And then the other problematic author for me, and I know some people stopped saying his name, but Sherman Alexie. I mean, when I read Sherman Alexie, it changed my life as a writer, and I realized I could write about authentic Native communities. So, his writing, I don't want to hang out with him, but his writing is important to me. Gosh, I feel like I could go, because I teach literature, so I could go on and on, but I just, there are there are a lot of Southern writers that influence me, but I'm also so fortunate where I live that there are so many great North Carolina writers. And in fact, there are so many great contemporary Western North Carolina writers. Charles Fraser is a mentor of mine, Ron Rash. Like, just this in the last 3 or 4 months, we were kind of laughing because I live in Jackson County, and in the same span of time, my book came out, Ron Rash had a collection come out and his novella. David Joy had another book come out. Leah Hampton had a collection of short stories. By the way, if you have never read that, you should. And really all those books. And I think there was like one more that has all of us have a connection to Jackson County, which is bizarre that there are so many. But I am every day just thrilled that I'm friends with these amazing authors, and they're my neighbors, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. So another fun connection. So Jeremy Jones.
Yeah, Jeremy Jones
is an Elon alum.
Oh yeah, I don't think I knew that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He's going to get mad that I forgot to.
It's okay. It is funny because he's an Elon alum, and I appreciate, Bear Wallow is so much fun, and I cannot wait for his book about his grandfather.
I can't either. I'm so excited.
Yeah. But that is really exciting. And so, to the students out there who might like to pick up a really good book over your extended break, I'll send you that list of authors, because I know who all she's talking about, and we have the recording, so we'll pull that list of authors. We have read Louise Erdrich in my class. We just finished La Rose. That's one I decided on for this class, even though there's so many that are so good. And then we read Sherman Alexie. We just watched we're watching Smoke Signals this week. He's been influential on a lot of people, and really allowed for this relatively new and large group of Native American authors in particular to really flourish.
Absolutely. I mean, think about like Tommy Orange and they're there, and Tommy has said he's not that influenced by Sherman and Alexie, but I don't know that that's true. just from reading his work, knowing he studied with him, and all that, he just has influenced so many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he probably points all the way back to M. Scott Momaday, but Tommy Orange is interesting. I heard him speak, and he's also influenced by a lot Faulkner and those very kind of classic white male authors that they're good there, right? That's why they're the canon. And I think with Faulkner, if you're Southern, you recognize yourself in Faulkner, or you recognize your space or your place or the accent, the voice in that.
Yep.
I think that's what makes it great. So I think that made me think of another question, but now I've forgotten. But I think what I'll do actually is let some of the people in the audience ask you questions now. We're kind of at that good space in here, and let them ask you some questions, and then I'll see if I have anything else to add or if you do as well. So I'm going to open it up to all of you who are hanging out with us. Feel free to ask anything you want.
I just kind of had a question because your book is really unique when we were talking about, how to define it and things like that and all the parts of the book. But I was just wondering personally, were there any other books that about Native American culture that you've ever written, or pieces that you've ever tried to publish in the past? Because I know this is your first major published work. Have you ever tried in the past, or is this your special one for you?
Oh yes, I have for years and years. No, I have another novel manuscript called Going to Water, and there have been pieces of it published in anthologies. It was a finalist for a Penn Bellwether Prize for socially engaged fiction. So it got some attention when those finalists were released. And I was able to place excerpts. But it's not, it's not published as a whole yet. And then I've actually done lots of different things. So I used to work for our principal chief of our tribe, and we did a series of children's books when I worked for him that integrate Cherokee language, traditional stories, and local artists. And so that was only pushed out through his office. We gave them to all the kindergarten kids in the area. And then I've done a lot of nonfiction writing for different regional publications. And most recently, and this is kind of part of the book business that I learned, that you write a lot of op-eds when your book is being released. And so I have written op-eds specifically about how our tribe has handled COVID. The biggest being published by the Atlantic. So that was a major publication for me, but Lit Hub and some other Appalachian focused publications have published my work. And I've done some short stories and anthologies and things like that. So I've been, I guess I was first published when I was in high school, technically speaking, with poetry. I would not recommend reading that. But have just kind of been writing and publishing since then.
And I kind of have a secondary question based off that. I was really became most excited to have you on when I read the Bitter Southerner article that they wrote about your book. I thought it was just so interesting how they told about your life story and about the book and stuff like that. And I mean, there are a decent amount, 10 to 12 that I could find right off the bat, articles about your book and reviews and things like that. So I was just wondering, like, how does that make you feel? Is there anything interesting that's come about from all this attention to your story?
Yeah, it's really been great. When I signed with University Press of Kentucky, I was at a point where I was speaking with an agent about the book, a really good agent, someone who has represented some people that I really admire. And she had requested like another revision. And then I got the offer from University Press of Kentucky. And so I had a decision to make. Do I keep trying to kind of break into that New York publishing scene? And that's a risk. Or do I go with a publication or a publisher that I knew some of the people connected to it, and and they talked about the book in the right way. They understood what I was trying to do, and it was guaranteed published with them. So I chose University Press of Kentucky, but the whole time I knew that university presses do not have the same kind of funding for book tours and publicity and things like that that the big publishers have. So I had low expectations of that, and I have been absolutely thrilled by the response in spite of that. And I don't know if it's kind of like, in some ways, being a debut novelist with a smaller press during COVID may have actually served me better. It has definitely hurt writers who are releasing books by big presses. But for me, I have been able to get into, bookstores around the country, events around the country that I wouldn't have had a budget to travel to, and who wouldn't have been having virtual events. And so I consider myself very lucky that has happened. And then the other thing, maybe more to your point, is the amount of support that I've had from other writers has been incredible. It kind of makes me tear up to think about, that article was done by Wiley Cash, whom I really admire. And his wife did the photos, and she's an amazing photographer. And so it's just like, always, like, I feel like because there's a lot of men writing in Appalachia, right? Like in my area, it's just the way it is. There are some women that have also, and I can talk about them too, but I feel like I have a bunch of big brothers who have been so supportive. David Joy sat down with me at a brewery, and we went through who to contact for articles and all that. And then the Kentucky writers that I know through Hindman, which is where I go to the Appalachian Writers Workshop. And that, I can talk about that too. That's a huge piece of how this book got published. Those writers are just profoundly supportive. And Silas House was my editor for this book. And which is a dream come true. And just, I would get text, over the last few months, that because there's all these author events right now, virtual, I get text constantly about, hey, Ron Rash just talked about your book, or hey, Silas just talked, and that's, I still can't believe it. You can tell my voice probably that I'm kind of gushing about it, because I can't believe the amount of support that I've gotten from those writers. And that has far more made up for not having a New York publisher. I've had such a great relationship with University Press of Kentucky. I've never had a problem with that process at all. And then just kind of the word of mouth has really just been incredible for the book. So I feel really grateful for that. And I should specifically say the Appalachian Writers Workshop, Rebecca Gale Howe, kind of ushered that. She's a poet, and she was connected with University Press of Kentucky and really ushered the book through. So.
I have a question, Annette.
Mhm.
This may be kind of like, I don't know if you can quantify it, but how much of the book would you say is like fiction compared to like events in your life or people you've met, or like, do you think it's pretty even or leans more one way or the other?
Mhm. I think the characters are very much a composite of people that I know and relationships that I know. One of the things I wanted to get across was how sometimes we label relationships for convenience sake, and how they're really more complex than that. So I wanted to explore the complexities of relationship, and I certainly know people who have those complex relationships. The event, really, in terms of fact, there are very few facts in the book. Just simply that the Grove Park had access to diplomats. There's things like it's referenced that, I don't want to give too many details away, that somebody might be trying to sell bear parts, And that I know people who were involved in that. I was writing this during a point when we had major wildfires, and I don't know if y'all remember that. It's a couple of years ago, I guess now. And it really just kind of overtook the atmosphere around. You would go outside and you just smelled of smoke, the air was heavy. And so there is that fire that takes place in the book. It's not, I don't know that there was a fire the summer of 1942, but I took, my own experience with that and placed it there. What's interesting is that, I was mentioning that several of us had books come out at the same time from Jackson County. 3 of us talk about wildfires in the books that just came out because we were all writing at the same time. So again, it's, kind of composites. It's less, I know this person exactly.
I have a question about something you said a little bit earlier before we got into the book, just about the community that you work in. You had mentioned that there's a much more recent reinvestment in culture into the community. And I was just kind of wondering you said that there was like an advance in the economic viability. And I was wondering what that was primarily a product of and if that's sustainable.
Sure. That's a product of gaming. So we have a casino that I think it's been open. Don't quote me on the year. I think it's like 1999 because I know that I was in high school around that time, somewhere around there. And it has been incredibly profitable and even has survived through COVID, remarkably. However, I'm glad you asked about sustainability because I don't think that that we should always put our eggs in one basket, especially the gaming basket. And so, I think we do as a tribe struggle to think about what are we going to do to continue that stability and growth. And so we do have a lot of conversations about that. And I have my own ideas about that, but it has allowed us to express our sovereignty more because we have taken back over our school system from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We have taken back over our hospital system from Indian Health Services. Several programs that were in the hands of the federal government are now under our control, and we're able to provide better services because of that. And then also just invest in our culture, like language programs and things like that.
I think too, one kind of residual part of gaming is it brings in people to the area, and I guess the silver lining of that is you're seen, you're not, the culture, it's not invisible. People know what Cherokee, North Carolina is, and then maybe they go into the Heritage Center and maybe they learn a little bit more, and then they know a little bit more, and that's helpful. Even though I know that too, the tourism aspect is one of the potentially the downside, even though it's bringing in money. It also means that you've got your,
yeah. There are pros and cons of both, definitely. Yeah. But gaming has also given us a voice, in terms of this country and in terms of political leadership. So, yeah.
We probably have time for a couple more questions if anybody has one.
Well, I hate to take the time away from students, but I'm always so curious about Essie. What happened to Essie?
Well, whatever you want to have happen to Essie. It's funny. So I want to be careful because I know not everyone has read the book. So I should say, because it sounds like you've read the book. So, some people have asked me this because the letter at the end is from Essie. And so it's signed Lishi. And so I have to make that clear because some people, have asked about that. And there's actually, it ties back to the beginning of the book when the name Lishi is talked about and who gets the name Lishi and all that. So the letter is to Lishi's granddaughter. And that's all I'll say in terms of that, because I don't want to spoil plot. But for those who haven't read the book, Essie is a figure that people feel strongly about usually when I talk to them. In fact, one of my colleagues at work, a history teacher, had read the book, and she came around the corner and I had stepped out of my classroom, and she kept walking, and then she came back and she looked at me and she said, "I hate Essie." And then just kept walking, which is great. Like, I feel whatever emotion you want to about Essie, as long as you feel emotion about her. I in my head, I know what happened to Essie, but I don't actually want to say what happened to Essie. Maybe one day I'll write about what happened to Essie.
I look forward to it.
All right, well, it's according to my clock at 6 o'clock on the dot. I want to be mindful of everyone's time and tolerance for Zoom, which I know is short. Annette, thank you so much for being here. I will say it just on behalf of myself. I can let Zoe speak for the Periclean scholars. Like I said, we were so excited, and when they asked me if I had any ideas of what they could do, you were the first person that I thought of, and the first event that I thought of, and I'm so excited to get to continue to hear you talk about your writing and Jackson County and Western North Carolina. It's just been a treat. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you so much, Annette. I was about to email you kind of saying this was our event that we planned the least for, and it was the best of the week just because of the dynamics and the detail of your book itself, and then also your story and just everything that you've had to say. So I think that this was just really meaningful on its own basis. So I really appreciate that. And I think also, on a last note, I think that your book is really I guess accessible to kids our age, and I think that it's a really good book to bring to our campus.
Great.
So thank you so much for coming.
Yep, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I'd like to echo that. This has been a privilege, and it was so great to hear about it from you. I've started to read it, but I'm not done, so I appreciate you not spoiling what happened.
Good.
Awesome. Cool. Annette, I will talk to you on email. I hope you're still available next week to come chat with the students in my class, because that's a whole other group of 32. And maybe a couple of familiar faces here.
Yep, looking forward to it.
I know, me too. All right, y'all have a good night. And thanks again.
Thanks, Annette. Have a good night. Thanks, Paula.
Thanks, Paula, for putting this together. It was awesome.
Well, you know, it was the Pericleans. They gave me the chance.
Pericleans. Thanks, Pericleans. Appreciate it. Say hi to Jeremy for us.